The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
On this episode, we have Tyler White, an amateur radio operator and a primitive survival skill expert of TJack Survival YouTube channel. We're going to be discussing survival skills. This is the Ham Radio 360 Field Radio Podcast. I'm your host, John Jacobs, W7DBO. If this is your first time hearing this show, thank you for clicking and tuning in. This show is part of the Ham Radio 360 network. This show releases every other Thursday, and the Workbench with George and Jeremy releases the opposing Tuesdays. Kale with the HR 360 show will typically release the Tuesday before this show. You can find out more information about all these shows at hamradio360.com. For this show, you can find our show notes and links at FLDIGI.org. Also be sure to check out our YouTube channel for expanded content not included in the podcast. On the way of news, the countdown clock is going. We are coming up on Winter Field Day. I'm excited to be able to get out this year and get operating. I've put together some YouTube channels if you're looking for information on how to configure your N3 FJP logging software with FLDIGI. And that is a great time saver. And then also I have a second video out on how to set up FLDIGI with macros for Winter Field Day. So be sure to check those out on our YouTube channel. And also you can find those links in our show notes. If you're not already, please subscribe to the Field Radio Podcast YouTube channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss anything. Also, if you did not get the newsletter that went out this week, please go to fieldradiopodcast.org and make sure you are subscribed. My goal is, if you did not get the email from Kel, he has stopped sending the HR 360 weekly email. And so please make sure you go to fieldradiopodcast.org and sign up for the email list for this show so I can send you some weekly information. We are continuing the gear store, and so if you're interested in some field radio gear, go to shop.fieldradiopodcast.org to get your hats, t-shirts, jackets, and tote bags. Use the promo code HR360 to get free shipping through the end of this month. In the newsletter, I included a notification that our friend Stuart KB1HQS on his YouTube channel is coming out with his My Portable Radio Gear series. This is going to be breaking down all the gear that he uses for different SOTA activations. You'll find a link over to Stuart's YouTube channel where you can follow his series. For our guest on the show, we have Tyler White. He is a local amateur radio operator in our area, and he also has the TJack Survival YouTube channel, where he goes into primitive living skills and survival. Now, this interview is going to be a little bit of a departure from your typical amateur radio interview, but I feel that this is an important concept that we all understand, especially as we are traveling in the backcountry and we put ourselves susceptible to this environment. We should be thinking about some of these survival skills and some of these emergency preparations. So if you are into emergency prepping and planning, this episode is for you. Tyler White has a wealth of information and knowledge in this area. And so I believe this is going to be an excellent staple for all of us to think about what we need to do to learn some of these primitive survival skills so we can not only be effective communicators, but as we expose ourselves to the outdoor and the environment, we can do so safely. So we'd like to welcome to the Field Radio Podcast Tyler White. He is a general cast licensee, and he is local to my area in Utah, and I came across him through our local clubs. And then also Tyler is the host of the TJack Survival YouTube channel that has a lot of survival techniques and tactics, but also has a component of using amateur radio in survival skills. And so we'd like to welcome to the show Tyler.
Thank you very much.
So tell us, first of all, about your background with learning survival skills and how you become, I guess, a YouTube star.
I don't know if I would call myself a YouTube star, but I grew up in southeastern Idaho on a ranch. I spent a lot of time out chasing cows around and finding arrowheads in the dirt, running around barefoot and shooting bows. So a lot of that stuff, it was just what we did. As I got older, I found kids my age would spend a lot of time at the mall or watching movies, and I would be out shooting squirrels and hunting and just spending time in the mountains, building forts is what I would call it as a kid. And all of that stuff translated well when I joined the military. And then kind of it got refined over many years of being in the military. And then I got to a point where I wanted to expand the knowledge that I had from the military, because it can only take you so far. The military is good at military survival. They're not as good at primitive survival. So I started chasing that. As far as how I got into YouTube, I never wanted to be on YouTube. I had a friend that worked at Blade HQ, and a couple of the employees there, I'd been teaching concealed permit classes in Kali, which is a form of martial art too. And they asked me to come in and show some of that stuff on video. And initially I said no, and then I said yes, because they said they'd give me some free gear, and it was kind of all downhill from there. But that's essentially how I got started. And then that whole process put me in a position where I needed to know from field experience and from one-on-one experience what I was talking about before I made any videos of it. So I went out and I learned, and I filmed a lot of the people who were teaching me. I perfected skills on my own, and then I went and taught them on camera. Tons of people are out there looking for these skills, and there's not a lot of really good places because there's just not a lot of people doing it. So they turn to YouTube and Google and the internet. And because of that, I had a lot of people asking me this stuff from Florida to Alaska to overseas. So I started creating videos that answered their questions, essentially. So it was simple stuff like how to use a piston fire starter, how to use flint and steel, how to make bow drills, I don't know if I've done any how to tracking ones. I've done some videos while I was out hunting. And then that leads to you needing a way to fund it. So I made a bunch of videos for readyman.com. Made some videos in exchange for some gear where I sought out the gear that I knew was good in exchange for demos and stuff. Currently, I'm at a point where I'm not really doing any gear reviews so much anymore. Now I'm kind of trying to do the stuff that I want to show. I've done this thing recently. It's called My Journey to Primitive, and it documents how I went from a soldier to a hippie, even though I'm not really a hippie. But it essentially says, look, I learned these skills in the military. I taught these skills in the military, and I got to the point where I just wasn't really learning anymore. So I went looking for who has what's next, and I found a lot of primitive instructors, primitive living people, and I started learning from them and started showing those skills and practicing those skills. And that put me at the point where I'm at now, where I'm actually teaching soldiers and recruits survival courses. I've been contracted by the 19th group locally to teach special forces people and recruits some of the survival skills, simple stuff like bow drills and edible food and how to make shoes out of pieces of rubber and string, just little simple things. Like essentially, if you were a POW, you'd be stripped of all of your equipment, all of the gear that you need. And that's normally where military excel at, is with their gear. And if you're stripped of your gear, what do? Well, the only answer to that question is primitive skills. So you have to learn how to make cordage out of natural materials. You have to learn how to know what the characteristics are for spindles and hearth boards, and know what you can eat, and there's a couple plants that are almost all over the world, and you want to know those plants up front. And just get a grasp on all this stuff. Understand simple concepts of building shelter, and that way when you move from environment to environment, the concepts don't change, the material changes, the plants change, but as long as they have the same attributes, you get the same effect.
So I've noticed, I guess the term is bushcrafting. Is that kind of a recent term that's kind of this genre?
Defining definitions is important, and I'm glad you hit that, because without defining your terms, you can't have any critical analysis. You can't really know what you're talking about. So the way I like to define it is this. There's military survival. I'm going to call that fieldcraft. From the beginning of me being in the military, we always called that fieldcraft. That is noise and light discipline, moving without light. That is land navigation. That is knowing what to bring and what not to bring. That is moving fast with heavy gear, that kind of stuff. Being able to function in an environment where people are trying to kill you. That's fieldcraft. Bushcraft is a term that the Brits got from Australia because they go out into the bush, or they would also call it in Australia bush tucker. And I don't know where that comes from, but that's the ability to create shelters from nothing or from the environment, to feed yourself from the environment, to hunt from the things you made in the environment. So bushcraft, I see it as having minimal tools like an axe, a knife, a saw, maybe a metal canteen, a backpack, simple things, and then crafting everything else that you need. So in Europe, anything that is really survival related, they call it bushcraft. Woodcraft is what we used to call it in the United States. Bushcraft was Britain, woodcraft was US. And woodcraft was basically doing bushcraft in the US with wood products. Now, survival is, I found myself in a bad position due to unforeseen circumstances, and I'm going to use anything to fix that situation. So survival will take bushcraft rules. It will take fieldcraft things. It'll take all of that stuff and just make it work until I can survive over the next, 72, 48, 24, whatever hours until I get rescued. The last one I want to bring up is primitive living. I personally believe that primitive living should be the knowledge base for all of this stuff, because that's what you have to go back to if you have nothing. So I love gear. I love my knives. I love my boots. I love all that stuff. But what do you do when you don't have them? The only answer is going to be primitive living skills. So I see primitive living skills as the ultimate survival path, in addition to bushcraft, woodscraft, and military fieldcraft. Because you got to know land navigation. And it's great to know land navigation with the compass, with the GPS, how to load your map datum, all those technical things. That's all military. It's also great to be able to travel at night just with the stars. I would point that in the direction of military and primitive living skills. It's also great to be able to create an atlatl from the bamboo or willow that you have in your area and put a obsidian tip on it using natural cordage or some sort of sinew from an animal, and hunt more animals with it, and then turn that skin into clothing, because there's only so much that you can do with a lot of this stuff. So all of that plays into survival. And, I think people get overwhelmed with survival because they see this elephant and they're like, how am I going to eat that? The way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So having said that, how do we break up survival? Well, I break it down by asking the first and most important question. What's going to kill me first? Right? So you need to understand the rule of threes in order to honestly know what's going to kill you first. The rule of threes, or Tyler's version of it, is this. You got 3 seconds without security, 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, and 3 months without companionship. So if you find yourself, let's say in Utah right now in the cold, if there was a war zone going on, you need to deal with security first. You're more likely to get shot than you are for anything else to happen. So there's that 3 seconds. If you're underwater, you got to get oxygen, right? Let's say you landed out in the Great Salt Lake. You got to deal with getting out of the boat or the airplane that's crashed before you can worry about anything else. So there's your 3 seconds, your 3 minutes. The next thing is 3 hours. Now, the 3 hour thing can stretch. Maybe in the jungle, you can go an indeterminate amount of time without needing shelter. But here, about 3 hours is about all you're going to get out in this cold if you don't have the right type of shelter. So shelter also includes the clothing that you have on you. First and foremost, dress right, dress appropriately, and be more prepared to carry an extra jacket that you don't use so that if you are there overnight, you're not going to freeze to death. The next thing is your water, because you can only go 3 days. Now, in this environment in Utah, maybe 3 days without water. In the summer, maybe down in the Little Sahara when it's hot, you might only get 4 hours, maybe a day or two. So that fluctuates as well. Yeah. And then lastly, 3 weeks without food. You're going to get grumpy after a day or two, but you're not going to die for up to 3 weeks. So the problem is people find themselves lost or in a situation. The first thing they do is they start looking for food. But that's probably the absolute last thing you should be worried about. You got to worry about security, oxygen, shelter, water, all before you start worrying about food. So you use that rule of threes to prioritize. And then lastly, if you have built yourself your new, little city off grid or whatever, eventually you've got to have companionship or you go a bit insane. Lastly on that, so we've taken the elephant, we've broken it down into identifying what's going to kill us first. the next thing we have to do is to identify the skills that we need to get good at so that we can address these problems. Okay. So of all the things that you always need to survive: fire, water, shelter, food, communications, medical, and security, and tools. Okay. So write those down: fire, water, shelter, food, communications, medical, security, tools. This is just a list that I made up. I'm sure it's like other lists that are out there. The reason why I put fire up there, number one, is because it's so versatile. Fire can be shelter. Fire can purify water. Fire can create heat. Fire can be that friendship and companionship. Fire can cook your food. Fire can be a signaling device. So it hits almost every one of the things that we listed, from the fire, water, shelter, food, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So it's also one of the easiest things to start learning how to do when it comes to primitive skills or military fieldcraft or any of that stuff, because there's so many different variants of it. So I would say if you're starting out in this, get good at a bunch of different ways of starting fire. Get to the point where you can go out into the wilderness with nothing but a knife, or nothing, including a knife, and create fire. One mechanism is to learn how to flint knap a river rock till it's sharp enough that you can scrape some mullein stick clean, put it on some sagebrush, scrape that clean, use the bark, make yourself a hand drill, and you've got fire. And you literally use nothing but your hands. You didn't need a knife. You didn't need anything. The next step up is going to be like a bow drill. Then you got to start learning for different environments. So you would learn how to use a bamboo saw or bamboo friction fire. You can learn how to use the fire plow. There's all these different mechanisms. Then you can kind of move forward in time and get into a flint and steel. Learn how to create charcloth, so that you don't have to do a bow drill for every single fire. You can use the little chunks of steel off the back of your knife and a rock to create a spark that connects with charcloth or charred material from your fire, and that's tomorrow's fire. Learn how to bank a fire, right? I can go completely down the rabbit hole for 20 more minutes on fire. The next step would be shelter. Shelter is, first off, you need to learn how to spend the night by yourself with no fire. That's the first shelter. It's going to be small, tight, low to the ground, but high off the ground because of insulation. The next step is going to be multiple people shelter, right? Maybe a open front-sided wiki up with a reflective fire in it. And you build from there. You might even get to the point where you want to learn how to build a log cabin, an off-grid log cabin, but learn from that ground up and just substantially go up. So all of this stuff brings me then to communication, which is why I assume one of the main things you want me to talk about. I was hunting in the Uintas a few years ago, and I could see the other guy I was hunting with, but my little Walmart push-to-talk radio couldn't reach him. Normally that's not the case, but that was a major issue for me. And I thought, I don't want to have to deal with this back up here on the backside of the mountain where my cell phone doesn't work, not being able to talk to someone that I can see. So I started researching, what can I do to legally amplify a radio signal? The only simple answer for that is you got to become at least a technician level operator. So I went to hamstudy.org, just memorized the questions and took my test. I've had friends decide they're going to get their ham radio operator on Wednesday, memorize the questions on Saturday, take the test the next Wednesday, and the following week have their certification. So it's something you can do quick. But as I got into this, I noticed that the ham radio certifications taught me a lot about some of the stuff I did with the military. And because of that, I went further and got my general operator, which gave me the ability to do HF communications, and HF being high frequency, bounces around the planet. And I can be at my house in Orem and talk to someone in Florida or up in British Columbia or down in Mexico. And I think that's awesome. So I continued to chase that rabbit, and I started getting into SOTA, which is Summits on the Air. And essentially those are little ultralight kits that you take backpacking. And the reason why that's awesome is because one of the major rules of communication is, first, have the correct antenna for the frequency. Second, get the highest altitude. And third, push more power. Well, the right antenna and the highest altitude means you just hike to the top of the biggest mountain. And then the power kind of becomes irrelevant because you're so high, you can bounce your signal all over the planet. You can go clear down to QRP, which is really low power, and still talk to people in other countries. I thought that was also awesome. So that had me pushing the boundaries of what I could do with solar panel and what I could do with ultralight battery packs and HF kits and a buddy pole and all that stuff. So That's when I started making videos on how to do SOTA type of communications. There's a bit of weight there, but it's not much more than, in fact, it's less than what we would use as the military, because the gear in ham radio isn't ruggedized, so it doesn't have all that extra metal carrying, boxes on it and stuff. So me being curious about something and then learning about it and then implementing it, and then being curious about the next thing and learning about it and implementing it, and just systematically going from fire, water, shelter, food, communication, and all that other stuff until I became well-rounded at all of these things, because I practiced it. I tested it. I went and found people that were good at it. I asked them. I had them teach me. I put them on film. I shared. And now no one ever wants to call themselves any kind of expert or whatever, but the military has a term, subject matter expert. And I think that's a fair assessment of my current position when it comes to survival. But having said that, I'm definitely learning more. I eventually want to get my extra certification for ham radios. I want to get better at brain tanning. I can process game completely, but I can't really turn the leather. I can't turn the hide into leather without man-made chemicals, and I want to fix that. So there's always more that you can do. There's always other things you can do. One perfect example, I'm very competent with hand drills and bow drills and friction fire, but I was able to go to Colombia, to South America, with Tops Knives and Bushcraft Global. And the Métis are they're a tribe in the jungle that were only first contacted in the 1970s. And when that happened, that was the first white man they'd ever seen, right? So they were able to show me their version of hand drill, which I've never seen anywhere before. And essentially, they don't have metal tools, so they'll use like hickory bones to scrape plants and stuff instead of metal. Because of that, they're not making a notch on their hearth board when they do a hand drill. So instead, they get this cotton type of material that they put underneath the hand drill hearth board, and the spindle, they just drill straight through the top of the spindle into that cotton material to create their ember. It was the coolest thing that I've ever seen. But that is another example of a way to do something with less. They don't have metal tools at all. They didn't have rocks, because the Amazon basin, all the rocks have been degraded from the water. So without rocks, without any tools, they're making a hand drill kit that effectively starts fire. That blows my mind. And the curiosity and the drive to learn more has just pushed me. And what's next? Let's go to the tundra. Let's see how they do it. And all of this stuff is what I've dumped on my YouTube channel, and all of this stuff is what I've pushed to learn more about.
I think and like I have found your channel and been working through your videos. That's a great encyclopedia, I guess, of survival. And this podcast, obviously is for the amateur radio operator that wants to go on the field. And talking to Stuart Thomas, which is a SOTA activator too, we got on the subject of I think we need to have a better situational awareness as operators. We're going into a unknown situation, or potentially more, I wouldn't say more dangerous situation, but you have more exposure going into backcountry, taking your radio and doing that. So how important is situational awareness? Just understanding your environment and what you're exposing yourself to when you do go in the backcountry.
So in 98 and 2000, I was a guide in Alaska. I worked for a helicopter company called Temsco as a glacier guide. And while I was up there, I volunteered for the Juneau Mountain Rescue team, their search and rescue team. And that experience, and part of, at the time too, I got my EMT certification on. I was looking at search and rescue, but there's no money in it as far as long-term paying the bills. So when I was there, it kind of came to me, partly because I was also in the military at the time, and they're constantly harping on you about situational awareness. All that means is pay attention to what's going on around you. If you don't pay attention to what's going on around you, something's going to get you. From the law enforcement perspective, we call that a white mindset. There's the color codes. White is, I'm looking at my iPhone and I'm jogging, on the Provo River Trail without paying attention to the drug dealers that are doing a trade right next to me. That's a white mindset. Yellow mindset is, I'm looking around and I identify those drug dealers, and now I can decide whether or not it's an actual threat. And if it's an actual threat, then I go into orange. I have a plan. Well, if they're doing a drug deal, maybe I'll go the other way. Red becomes, oh, they pulled a gun on me. Black is after the fact. So poor situational awareness is a matter of people being in a white mindset constantly, and they just aren't thinking about what's going on because they haven't had to think about it for so long. We don't live in an environment right now where if we forget to chop wood, we're going to freeze to death, right? So we don't live in an environment where, you know, if we don't go out without our AK-47, we might not have a way to fight back. We're not exposed to that. So when we do go into the backcountry and get into that environment, we got to stop and think about it a little bit. So I think that's major important. And me, I guess, being in a yellow mindset at the time when I was doing the hunting in the Uintas led me to researching what it would take to prevent a communications failure in the backcountry. Because I was 2 days back there. I hiked in by myself 2 days deep to the backside of this mountain. And then my other hunting partners were going to come in and meet me on like channel 7 or whatever it was. And I could see them, and we didn't communicate for a few hours until I finally got a hold of them with a signal mirror. And then they got on the right frequency. We figured all this stuff out. But I thought about that. I was like, my phone definitely doesn't work back here. So what's the other solution? Well, again, that's what led me to the ham radios. There was a repeater up there that I could use. I have since gone back subsequent years hunting and gotten up on the cliff right there and talked to people clear down in Salt Lake City on the 6.2 repeater. So now I have I know for a fact I can communicate with people that can rescue me and give them grid coordinates with my FRS positioning device on my ham radio. I can be rescued. I can call for rescue for other people. I can help with that kind of thing because I have a plan B now. And it costs me, you know what, $56 or $38 for a Baofeng, or how many thousands of dollars for a sat phone. I mean, it's cost effective. And while I bring this up too, there was one time when I was driving downtown Orem and I got a ham radio call that someone needed help on the backside of Temp. They didn't have cell phone coverage, but they were able to reach one of the repeaters. And we were able to relay the information to EMTs to get an ambulance up there to him. And he was a mountain biker that had wrecked and broken a couple bones, had bones coming out of the skin, and really messed himself up. And that's an example of me just playing with a hobby, being able to be lucky enough to be at the right place in the right time, and then using a ham radio in one hand and a phone in the other, relayed the information so they could get an ambulance up there to take someone off the mountain that was in a critical situation.
So what would you say for the operator going in the backcountry? What is the minimum set of equipment that they should take with them besides their radio, of course?
Yes. Take your cell phone. You got to have a cell phone. You know, there's nothing wrong with bringing it back there. When you are out of cell phone coverage, turn it off, because your cell phone's searching for towers and it's going to juice the batteries. And having said that, take power backup. So I forgot to mention earlier that little thing of the fire, water, shelter, food, communications thing. The ending to that is have a way to replenish all of those. Okay. So you got a cell phone. Great. How many hours is that going to work before it dies? So you have a ham radio. Great. How many hours is it going to work until you die? So what you need to do is back that up with a power supply. I have some Goal Zeros. I've got some Anchor. I call them Anchor tanks. It's a battery that'll run my cell phone for like 2 weeks straight before that battery runs up. I have some power film roll-up solar panels and one really nice, big, spread out 60-watt one. So as an example, if I take my soda kit up in the Uintas, I have a buddy pole. I have a Yaesu, what is it? I can't remember the model number. It's an HF tri-band radio. And then I have a BioEno battery pack and a 60-watt solar panel. I can set that 60-watt solar panel on the side of my teepee or my truck or whatever, and I have communications indefinitely. I will not run out of communications because every day that sun replenishes that battery, and I only need to use that battery at night. And if I'm in listening mode, I'm only using just a small amount of communication. And if I'm high enough, I don't need a lot of power to get out. So that's the one thing, is think about the contingency. So you've got a ham radio. Let's say I've got my Yaesu VX8R. Great. That's going to work for about 4 hours of semi-constant talking, and then it's dead. So I need some backup batteries if I'm only going to be there a few days. And there's nothing wrong with getting a solar panel, charger, battery tank of some sort, so that when it does go down, I can switch it out. So that, I guess, to answer that question, the number one thing you need to look at is How am I going to keep it running? So I got it running, but how am I going to keep it up?
Okay. And so I noticed when you had one video on urban survival, it's something we don't think about too much. So what would be, I guess, our everyday carry, even in an urban environment, that we would be wanting to keep with us at all times?
So what I do, again, fire, water, shelter, food, all that stuff, okay? I have a knowledge base currently that should let me reasonably create friction fire from nothing. I can go out and find trees in the park and make friction fire from them. That's not average, but that's my fallback. The next level up is going to be a bit lighter with, we call them Ranger bands, and it's just a chunk of road bike tire wrapped around the outside. The reason being is I can pull that road bike tire off, I can hit it with the Bic, and now I basically have a candle that burns and burns and burns. This is how we started fires in the jungle. It was an amazing way to start fire. So there's my fire, right? Water. If you really think you're in a bad situation, get a Stillcott key so that you can unlock the water supplies in the area. Get some sort of water containing device that's metal so that you can boil the water if it's bad. If you're in a city, you're going to want to remove chemical contaminants. So you need a filter that's got carbon and ceramic, so it'll take whatever's out of there. If you're outside of the city, you only really need to worry about biological contaminants. So boiling will always work. So when it comes to urban, you have to look at those different things. It goes back to the what's going to kill me. Well, if I drink contaminated water, the chemicals are going to kill you. Okay, the next logical question is how to remove the chemicals. Well, the only way to remove chemicals really is carbon and ceramic filters to get the big chunks of stuff out. So now you have to have a purifier that can do that. The other thing you need to look at is duration. If you work in downtown Salt Lake City and you live in Bountiful, okay, how long is it going to take for you to walk home? Well, that should tell you what you need to have in your car. Let's say worst case scenario, EMP happens or a nuclear weapon goes off and you got to walk from Salt Lake City to Bountiful. You should have at least enough gear in your backpack to make that possible. You know, maybe you only live a few blocks from school and you can walk home in a few minutes. You really don't need anything. You know, it would be nice to have a flashlight, a pocket knife, and I'm always a proponent of a concealed carry weapon. So there's your security, there's your light, just really simple stuff. As far as communications, I'm a little bit of a ham radio nerd, so I've always got a push to talk and usually like a mobile in my vehicle. So if I've got my vehicle access, even if the car doesn't start, I've got battery juice for at least a few hours, and there's communication, right? So just think about that. I like to tell people, look at the absolute worst case scenario in your area and make sure that it's absolutely probable. So the worst case scenario, I think, for Salt Lake Valley is going to be earthquakes from a natural perspective and some sort of a nuke or something going off from a man-made perspective. Now, is it possible that aliens are going to come down and start abducting us? Maybe, but it's not probable. So the most probable and likely worst case scenarios, I think, are earthquake and EMP or nuke or something like that. So if you have identified the problem, now you can prevent against it. Well, if there's an earthquake, you may not be able to move your vehicle through crushed rubble. So you're going to want first a flashlight because you're going to need it to get out of the building if it goes down on you. Maybe a handy talkie or a cell phone or something in a day bag with a battery backup. I pretty much always have an Anchor tank in one of my bags that I carry with me all the time just because I'm a voracious consumer of data. So that keeps my phone working. My phone also has Echo Link on it, so I can call into the local tower. So right now I'm on the other side of the planet, and I can call in with this phone to the repeater in Salt Lake City and talk to any of you ham radio operators in just a few minutes through the internet. So learn about those technologies, know that they exist, and use those as your backups.
Okay.
And then lastly, for urban, get a concealed permit, carry a pistol, learn how to use it. I think that's an important way to deal with things, but also understand in real grid down situations, people help each other. There's only like that 1% that sees that as a looting opportunity. That's what you need to protect yourself against, but recognize the majority of the people out there are just like you, doing the same things as you. They want to protect themselves and they want help just like you do. So work with people when this stuff happens. Don't be the problem.
So this brings me to my other question I had for you. Given that your military and law enforcement experience background, and this is kind of a sensitive subject with amateur radio operators because we're not allowed to encrypt our transmissions, or we're not able to obscure meaning. So how do we maintain operational security, which is a good law enforcement military term, in a emergency situation, not exposing ourselves by using our radios?
So in an emergency situation, you don't want to obscure anything. You want as many people to hear you as possible, right? Now, yeah, there's that whole, Red Dawn situation. And if you genuinely think that's the issue, then you need to find a way to legally purchase encryption stuff, or some trunking radios, or some radios will use like the upper sideband instead of the lower sideband. There's ways that you can be on the same frequency but not be as audible, but other ham radio operators are going to be able to figure that out pretty quick. The general population won't. So you can kind of protect your communications against the general population by, using a lower sideband on a single sideband or upper sideband radio. There's ways to get around that. There's other stuff, like there's some new radios like Hyteras that'll do time digital matrix communication, and they can put multiple talkers on the same frequency. So there's ways to protect it a little bit, but short from actually encrypting stuff, you're never going to really be totally secure. But at the same time, you don't want to be totally secure in an emergency situation, because if there's someone out there that can help you, you want to talk to them. Now, you also want to have some sort of plan, because if nobody's on the other end of the radio listening for you, that's a problem. So let's say that if a situation goes down, you know that every Thursday at 5 p.m. you're going to get on frequency 123 and call your brother-in-law that's in the next over state. You practice that before the emergency ever happens, and then before you leave that conversation, you schedule the next time and you wait at that frequency. And let's say they don't answer, and then you have an alternative frequency. So I don't know. Let's say Thursdays at 5, you have 123 on one channel, and 10 minutes later you have 321 on the other channel. That way you can try one channel for 10 minutes, and if it's just not in, you can switch the other channel and hope that the other person gets back to you. And if they don't reply, you don't talk to them again until next Thursday at 5. So that's essentially how you would institute these communication setups, because that's the way they used to do it before we had complicated ham radios in our pocket that we call cell phones.
Okay, so I think that's an important point to bring out is having documented plans with, say, your family. All these skills you have will certainly keep you going, but all this has to be well thought out, this communication plan in advance.
Exactly. Like, I've got a relative that is another ham radio operator that lives up in southeastern Idaho, and we have many times practiced talking to each other directly and through a couple of the big repeaters in Salt Lake City. So he's got this big 14-element Yagi antenna that he puts out on his deck and points at the repeater, and then I, being down in Orem, can pretty much get to that repeater from my house. And if not, I've got a medium-sized Yagi antenna on my roof, and I've got a heavily amplified mobile radio that I can use down in my basement. So we can both reach that repeater, and we both can have some pretty solid long-distance communications in the event that something happens. Now, understand, if you're using a repeater, so is everybody else during a grid down situation, so you're going to have to be careful of that. But at least he and I have a plan B. If something happens, we get on that frequency and we try to talk to each other. The only other option would be for him to get his ham radio certification and us to have a plan where every day at 5 p.m. we try these two frequencies for 10 minutes, and those two frequencies are whatever. Without that, nobody's going to be listening on the other end, or at least not the people that you want to be listening.
And so that's another good point you have here before we wrap up is like you've mentioned, practicing your craft with your primitive life skills is the notion of somebody says, I'm going to put this ham radio gear in my bag, and then never practice it. Just wait till the big one hits, and then I'll use that equipment.
Yeah, if you can't walk out of your house right now, grab your kit and get someone on it,
you've already failed, because you're not going to do any better when crap hits the fan. So when there's occasionally this mentality with soldiers that, oh, we'll have that when we deploy, or, oh, I'll get better at that when we deploy. No, it just gets worse, because you have less access to gear, you have less access to the things you need. So if you haven't done a 100% dry walkthrough now, you're not going to be at 100% when crap hits the fan.
That's true. Yeah, and that's why I think it's important we do get out in the field, because operating field radio is not, it's not easy, because like I said, you're dealing with elements around you on top of trying to operate a radio, especially in HF elements, knowing what works, and you turn 5 feet and then it stops working. So before we wrap up, is there anything we haven't covered with this that you'd like to convey, with these type of skills?
This stuff is easy if you just go and do it. It sounds really complicated, but it's not. Just find someone who's good at it and ask them questions until you figure it out. That's the one thing that I would convey. I don't know how many people are like, oh, I want to do that. Oh, I want to do that. And I just call BS, because if you wanted to do it, you would do it already. So if you're interested in it, go to hamstudy.org right now, create a profile, and start studying for your technician test. If you got your technician, start studying for your general. If you don't have the money yet, start saving. I mean, there's tons of excuses that people give all the time for not doing this stuff, but there's also all sorts of soliloquies I could give you about excuses, but in the end, if you're not just going and doing it, you're never gonna. So if you're interested in this stuff, just go do it right now. That's what I would say to people.
All right, with that, that's really good advice, and I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the show and give this information to our listeners. Let us know how they can find out more information and find you on YouTube.
So YouTube, my channel is TJack Survival. It's TJack space survival. I'm on YouTube. I think I've got an Instagram I do a little bit. I've got a Facebook page. All of them are TJack Survival. I do make stuff for readyman.com as well. I also run a really big survival Facebook page called the Bushcraft and Survival Tribe. People hit me up for questions constantly. If you got a question about this stuff, send me a message. I'm really interested in it. And sometimes that forces me to research things that I haven't thought of before in order to answer those questions. And then we both learn about new things. So I love running into other, information addicts like myself, because that's how I learn about the fact that you can put ham radio through your cell phone, or the fact that you can have mobile communications to talk completely around the planet. I didn't know a lot of this stuff existed a few years ago until someone came to me and presented the problem of, well, what if you had to go off grid and communicate from all the way around the planet? And then I researched it, and now here we are.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Tyler, for coming on the show.
Thanks much. It was good to be here. If you guys do one in the future or leave questions, I will come back in and answer some more later on if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be great. I think this will spur a lot of conversation, like on the Facebook groups, and like I always mention with people, that they can always email me at john@hamradio360.com, and we can do a follow-up show with you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd love to bat around some more ideas.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you again, Tyler, for coming on the show. I appreciate the interview. Like I said, this was not your typical amateur radio hobby interview, but nonetheless, there is some great information there, and I hope you found it beneficial. Everything that Tyler talked about, you can find on his YouTube channel at TJack Survival, and I will link that in the show notes. For the training item, I thought since we're already taking a non-traditional route with this episode, I would take it one step further and talk about how you can use Twitter as a communication tool. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking Twitter, and how is that an emergency communication tool? So I hope you enjoy this training item as I outline and make the case for using Twitter for your local emergency clubs, for your personal emergency communication plan, and also gathering and disseminating near real-time information and not waiting around for the media to go live on the radio and TV. This is John, W7DBO, with the training item. I would like to give you a quick overview of Twitter and provide some ideas on how best to use this free service for gathering or disseminating vital information. Twitter is a social media tool with a wider variety of users than any other social media. Twitter is utilized by personal users, federal, state, and local government organizations, by national and local media, non-government organizations, corporations, and many other organizations and groups. Twitter is an excellent tool to acquire information on events in real time. Given the state of our media, you will see traffic on Twitter long before breaking news on any local or national media platform. As an example, a news desk or reporter will tweet out that they are at the scene of an incident well before they ever go live with the news story on TV or radio. Media now gets their information from government officials via Twitter. If you are following the fire department, police department, or emergency service outlets, you will be one step ahead in gathering near real-time news. If there is an event, such as an active shooter or fire, the use of a hashtag will organically combine common posts. For example, locally we had a wildfire. The hashtag rangefire was used. Anyone could add that hashtag in their post, and anyone could search by the hashtag to see their posts. This allowed for a rapid combination of users around a single event. In this case, we had local officials, emergency services, citizens, and media all using the hashtag. So all you had to do was follow that hashtag and not individual accounts. Twitter supports the use of lists, so you can combine certain accounts into one feed or list. For example, I have all of my local fire and emergency services on a list. I can watch what they are saying and not everyone else I follow. Information on how you can set up lists and use Twitter this way can be found on my website at w7dbo.net under articles. In a nutshell, if you want the pulse of what's happening locally, nationally, or worldwide, you follow the Twitter traffic. Having this level of real-time information is beneficial in everyday life for traffic situations, but also essential in developing emergency situations of your own. Public information officers with government, law enforcement, EMS, and disaster release organizations will use Twitter to relay important information to the media and the public during an event as long as the internet connections last. As with any source of information, note the source of information for validity. Was the source an official government entity, or a media outlet, or a man on the street? Lastly, you can use Twitter to disseminate your own personal status in an emergency. You can send a tweet as a text message from your phone, and your family and loved ones can watch that account for your "I'm safe" or "I need help" messages. Twitter will disseminate much faster and more efficient than a group text or email list. And your post is on the internet to access from anywhere without login credentials. So consider how you can utilize Twitter for your family emergency communication plan and your local EMCOM emergency communication plans. Twitter is a great tool to use in your communication plan to get vital information. It is not a replacement of any other method, but just another tool to take advantage of. The use of Twitter is a great replacement to speed up notifications such as Aries callouts, where email lists are currently used. For more information and a demonstration of how to use Twitter to gather and disseminate information, please visit my website at w7dbo.net. That's Whiskey 7 Delta Bravo Oscar.net. This is John, W7DBO, with the training item. This will do it for this episode. Thank you, Tyler, for coming on the show. Remember to check out our new gear shop at shop.fildradiopodcast.org. As always, please send me your comments, feedback, and show ideas to John, John, at hamradio360.com. 73.